Hi again, everyone. Welcome to ACC Breakdown. It's a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, so this is the place to be to talk ACC football 24/7, 365, even when it's baseball season, the end of basketball season, and if you're talking football, most likely you're talking NFL because the NFL draft kicks off in Chicago on Thursday night. So we'll take the ACC angle, of course, at the NFL draft. Not a whole bunch to talk about in regards to notable players who are projected to go extremely high. If you look in recent NFL drafts, the ACC is stacked up pretty well against the likes of the Big Ten and the Pac-12, with, of course, the SEC leading the way. But the ACC has done extremely well in the NFL draft and flooding the first and second rounds, the top end of the NFL draft in recent years. The projections, not so much this year, despite some early entries into the draft, most notably from the Clemson Tigers, the defending champions. All right, we got Jim Hammett from Cardiac Hill representing Pitt. We also got Joey Weaver from the Rumble Seat talking up some Georgia Tech. Jim, we're going to start with you because Tyler Boyd, obviously a marquee player at wide receiver in college football for the last few years. He is your guy to watch and track this weekend in Chicago. Just your thoughts looking back about his impact on Pitt football, his style of play, what you remember about his career at Pitt, and where we might expect him to go this weekend in Chicago.
Yeah, to look back at Tyler Boyd, and it starts. He was on the first team that played in the ACC, so I remember that first game. They had Florida State, and Jameis Winston just torched Pitt. So, it was kind of a bad memory. But at the same time, Tyler Boyd made some great plays, and you just kind of knew right then and there, okay, he's for real. He's going to do this for the next couple years. And, from that game on, he was able to do that. He changed quarterbacks. He changed head coaches. But through it all, he was the constant of the Pitt offense. We've talked about on the show before about the percentage of catches he had in the Pitt passing game. I mean, he was the Pitt passing game. He's a tremendous player. He's a good route runner. Not the fastest guy in the world, not the biggest guy in the world, but he just seems to come up with making big plays. So I think his game's going to translate to the NFL pretty well. Probably a second or third round pick. I know some people have given the Keenan Allen out of the Chargers as a comparison, or maybe Allen Robinson from the Jaguars, something like that. So, a high value, high productive guy, but not quite a first rounder.
Yeah, I've seen him generally projected in that top 50 to 75 range, like you say, in that second or third round range. That Jameis Winston game, of course, that was a Thursday night opener, right, Jim?
It was Monday. It was the Labor Day, Monday night.
Monday. I knew it was an off night. Yeah, that's right. The Monday night at Heinz Field, the ball barely hit the ground for Jameis that night.
It was something to see, and that was his Heisman season, so you knew right then and there, okay, he's also for real. So you had two star freshmen kind of going back and forth, but Jameis he obviously won the battle and the war.
The only other guy that I can think of who played at a high level in college is doing very well in the NFL right now, that played at a big-time program in a Power 5 conference that was just targeted time and time again, and you wonder, what is the defense doing when this guy catches, in his case, like 115 passes a year? Nobody else is in barely double digits, and that was Jordan Matthews at Vanderbilt. He would catch an unworldly number of balls there at Vandy, and they had no other options at that point just a few years ago. All right, Joey, Georgia Tech coming back from... I'm going to make a vow, Joey. I am not going to mention the win-loss record from 2015. We're done with 2015. It almost came out of my mouth again, and I am making a vow to one of my best contributors here that it's not coming out anymore. So let's look ahead to 2016, as we will later in the show. But before we do that, a couple Georgia Tech players who might show up possibly on Friday or Saturday.
Yeah, if I never hear another thing about that 2015 season, it'll be too soon. Two guys to watch for Georgia Tech in the draft this weekend mainly would be Adam Gotsis, the defensive tackle, defensive end combo, as well as DJ White, the defensive back, probably a corner. Gotsis a little higher rated, could play either a 4-3 defensive tackle or maybe a 3-4 defensive end spot. Really could play kind of anywhere between 280 and maybe even, he said something like 310. He had a crazy frame in college, about 6'5", 285, and nearly had a six-pack. It was pretty impressive. Maybe not quite, he was playing probably a little out of position, playing the nose tackle spot in college, so getting him to more of a defensive end spot, I think, will be a really good opportunity for him to thrive. A lot of people have him kind of between, maybe anywhere between early third round, even into early to mid fifth round. The biggest knock on him right now is that his season ended a little bit early in 2015 with a torn ACL. So teams are going to be monitoring how he's recovering from that, how he's doing. He was able to do some workouts, mainly at his pro day, things like bench press and a couple of these arm things that didn't really involve running. But a guy who's going to interview very well, like I said, very good physical stature, should fit that role very well for a team. Look for him anywhere in the third to fifth rounds. And I think somewhere in that same range is where you're going to find DJ White. He's not the most physically imposing corner. He did not test off the charts, but what he kind of lacks in athleticism, he makes up for with really good technical ability, really good coverage skills, really good instincts. Obviously, famous play, made a few big-time interceptions that either won or put Georgia Tech in position to win games in 2014. The big one that ended the Georgia game, there's one that set up the game-winning field goal against Virginia Tech. So DJ White is a guy, again, he may not be your number one corner when your team drafts him, but he's a guy who very much can handle his own side of the field and zone coverage, things like this. So expect for him to go somewhere, again, in that same maybe late third to back end of the fifth round area. But those are the two guys to watch, are Gotsis and White.
All right, Jim, I just had to look this up while Joey was talking. I knew that Jameis Winston performance was ridiculous. The ball barely hit the ground. Yeah, 25 of 27, 93% completion percentage, 356 through the air, 4 touchdowns, no picks. Of course, that was the first step toward winning a national championship for Florida State at 14-0. All right, guys, you guys are pretty familiar with Jalen Ramsey. This guy might be the best athlete in the draft. The two quarterbacks most likely are coming off the board, Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. Jalen Ramsey looking to go to San Diego, most draft experts think. The cornerback from Florida State, just a freak athlete, great career at Florida State, may need to catch the football a little bit more to be a superstar in the NFL. Dropped a lot of would-be interceptions, but wow, just a hard-hitting kid, a kid that they moved around in the secondary, played safety, played corner, can play anywhere, supports the run, does it all. I noted off the top that the pickings for the ACC early in the draft, a little bit sparse. I see Sheldon Rankins, defensive tackle from Louisville, very much liked in that 20 to 25 range. The Redskins really like him. They're projected by some to get after Sheldon Rankins, who, despite being a defensive tackle, and you could speak to this a little bit better than me, Joey, pushes the pocket and is one of the better D-tackle pass rushers around. And then Kevin Dodd's also a player with Shaq Lawson getting most of the attention at Clemson, actually a better pro prospect at this point. Later in the first round, most likely early second round, Kevin Dodd, the guy that opposite Shaq Lawson got the job done in pressuring the quarterback and coming off the edge. So some other guys, and I'll just throw these names out there, and if anybody stands out to you guys, I'll throw it to you, Jim and Joey. MacKensie Alexander coming out early for Clemson, of course, freakish type athlete. The kid can jump out of the gym and also, run with anybody in the country. Jacoby Brissett, much later round pick, a project possibly because of a little bit raw skills, but definitely just tore it up for NC State once he came from Florida. Deion Bush, a safety from Miami, should be a good pro player. Jeremy Cash, first-team All-American at Duke at safety. Kendall Fuller really didn't finish off his career at Virginia Tech the way he would have liked, but an NFL-type corner from the time that he stepped on campus. That was always the projection for him. Going back to Clemson, they've got a safety in Jaron Kearse, who's really good. Shaq Lawson, we mentioned him. His stats over the past couple of years were ridiculous, like 24 sacks and 48 tackles for loss. Sharon Peake, trying to keep up that Clemson run of freakish wide receivers, some projected to be great, like Sammy Watkins, others like Martavius Bryant, who has really shown up for the Steelers, who wasn't necessarily considered to be a top-end receiver, drafted like in the 4th round, and now he's making huge plays in the NFL. And Terrence Smith, going back to Florida State, inside linebacker, great player there. And I'm throwing on Alex Canal, the Wake Forest punter, who early last season, even with about 10 games left in his career, punted so much at Wake Forest that he set the national record, all-time record, for just the number of sheer punts for Wake Forest, and then he tacked on a number of games after that. So he's got a pretty good cushion on that all-time punting record, but he's good enough to be a pro prospect and most likely will kick with somebody in the NFL. So, Jim, anybody stand out to you off that list, or anybody else that you'll enjoy seeing on Sundays?
Well, being from Pittsburgh right now, a lot of the talk is, with the Steelers, and a lot of the talk is going after a corner. And so a lot of names have been thrown out there. And MacKensie Alexander, I think they're picking around 25. He's kind of being tossed around there. Artie Burns from Miami is also, Kendall Fuller even. So, the Steelers are definitely looking for a corner, and, I listen to the talk shows, read the papers. So a lot of these names you've mentioned are being mentioned for the Steelers. So that's one thing that's caught my attention. The other thing is, a lot of these high-end picks, they're defensive guys. There's no real high-end quarterback or running back. Ramsey, Lawson, Rankins, Alexander, it's all on the defensive side of the ball. Not that it means much, but it just seems there's a lot of ACC defensive players coming out.
That's an interesting thing you bring up right there, because we would think of the ACC as being light on defense, and this isn't a huge sampling of players, but I ripped off about 10 or 12 to 14 players, and most of them, from the defensive side of the football. Joey, anybody stand out to you? Of course, you're down there in Houston, Texas, and it seems like the Texans always seem to be amidst draft controversy, whether it's Jadeveon Clowney, a number of other selections, or just trades that they get involved in. But the Texans usually selecting, they have made the playoffs a couple times, but usually selecting in the top half of the draft.
Well, first of all, Mark, I want to point out that individual season, most punts in a season, that is ACC football at its finest. I will say. As far as the Texans, I thought one of the really interesting ones that you mentioned that I saw in a mock draft was the Texans, I think in the 3rd round, taking Jeremy Cash out of Duke. I think if somebody gets him in the 3rd round, that is a steal. I think that kid is a really good ball player. I think he's going to translate very well to the NFL. Another one that you mentioned that I think could be very sneaky and could almost sneak into the 1st round is Kendall Fuller. I think that if he had played this past year instead of being injured, I think we'd be talking about him as like a surefire 1st-round type of talent. So he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. It is interesting, though, you talk about how much of these prospects that are top 3, top 4 round type guys coming out of the ACC are all on defense. I think that could very easily kind of flip next year when you look at guys like Deshaun Watson coming out, Dalvin Cook will be coming out. I think Florida State has a wide receiver, I can't remember their name, is also coming out. Guys like James Conner might be coming out of Pittsburgh, things like this. So I think that script could be kind of flipped next year, and it might just be a little bit of a temporary thing. But definitely a major trend towards defensive players coming out of the ACC this year for sure.
All right, guys, the stat geek in me is coming out. So Alex Canal punted 337 times. That's an NCAA record. Actually, Joey, what you just said about ACC and punting going hand in hand, he broke the record of Virginia Tech's A.J. Hughes, who was there with the Hokies from 2012 to 15, who punted 310 times. So the all-time punters, just punting the football, not effectively necessarily, but come from the ACC with Canal and Hughes. So he's got a 27-punt lead. Alex Canal punted 75, 81, 86, and this past season 95 times for Wake Forest. Twice in his career led the nation in punting, just number of punts. But he's also effective. 43.6 the last 2 years for Wake Forest. So
hashtag go ACC.
That's it. That is it. And so Wake Forest has a big hole to fill in the punting game, which is important, but especially for them, they need to get the field position in order and do it 95 times a season. That's crazy. All right, guys, we also talked a few minutes before we came on the show in regards to, transition from college to the NFL. Who from your days of watching Jim, Pitt, we'll start with you. Your favorite pro player who came from Pitt, whether that's currently or in the past.
Mine would be Larry Fitzgerald. He's just been so fun to watch. He's been in the league for 13 years. And his sophomore season, he finished second in the Heisman Trophy. And I was right around like 8th grade, so like I thought he was pretty much the greatest thing ever. So it was just a fun time watching him at Pitt and going to the Cardinals and even eventually playing the Steelers in the Super Bowl a few years down the line. So he's just, he's a true professional. You'll never see him in trouble. And he's really good too. He's a Hall of Fame player, walking. So Larry Fitzgerald's my guy.
Yeah, from a good standpoint with Larry Fitzgerald, what I remember and will remember with him in regards to his pro career is coming into the league. There was all the talk of him hanging around Chris Carter in the Minnesota Vikings as he was growing up, and he's got hands consistent with that kind of surrounding. Chris Carter with two of the greatest hands in the history of the NFL, and Larry Fitzgerald right there. 92 for 1672 and 22 touchdowns his last year at Pitt. That is a crazy good year for Larry Fitzgerald. Unfortunately, not his fault. This is actually a great thing out of him, but the final result not great. Other thing I remember about Larry Fitzgerald is Kurt Warner to Fitzgerald, about $1.90, about $1.30 left, something in that range, 90 seconds left in the Super Bowl. Could have won the game, but then Roethlisberger and Santonio Holmes ruined that and didn't get his Super Bowl ring because of that. Joey, Georgia Tech products in the NFL. We talk wide receivers. It's a normal connection that we would make, but we'll leave it up to you in regards to your favorite Yellow Jacket in the NFL.
Yeah, it feels strange coming from an offense like Georgia Tech's and you start going straight to wide receivers in the NFL. That might dispel a couple of recruiting myths. But the one that I go to is, you talk about current players and past players. A guy that's kind of right in that threshold that just retired, obviously, is Calvin Johnson. He was nothing but a pleasure to watch in the league. Always just constantly made us proud. If anything, kind of made us sick that the teams weren't able to do any more than they were able to while he was here. I think the biggest accomplishment they probably had was a 9-6 ACC championship game loss to Wake Forest in maybe one of the worst football games ever played. If I had to pick a current player, though, I'd actually stay at that wide receiver position, go with Demaryius Thomas up in Denver. It's been really cool watching him have a lot of success there, especially winning that Super Bowl this year. Been a really heartwarming story to kind of follow, especially with the trials and tribulations dealing with his mom, things like this. So somehow you've got an offense that for the last 8 or 9 years has been very run-heavy and focused on rushing yards, and now my two favorite NFL players of the last decade have been wide receivers. So figures how those things will work, but definitely Calvin Johnson and Demaryius Thomas, I would say.
A Georgia Tech wide receiver who led the ACC in receiving yardage twice. His last season at Tech, 06, 76 for 1202 and 15 scores.
Consensus All-American, too, I believe.
Yes, consensus All-American 2006. Yeah, out of Georgia Tech. 10th in the Heisman voting. Good stuff. All right, guys, it was fun. Let's bring it up to 2016 and the boys in camp right now. Joey, we talked about it this week in regards to Georgia Tech coming off a scintillating 13-3 showing at the spring game. Means nothing, but just kind of fun to say that the defense dominating the offense much as what we saw last year. I know you got some concerns along the offensive line. There's some shakeup at quarterback. Also, just in regards to the response at the gate for the spring game, what do you got for us?
Right, so we talked through a lot of the performance and such on Monday, and you can find that video either on YouTube on Mark Rogers' TV channel or at fromtherumbleseat.com. It's been posted. That's right, little plug. And but that's another thing that kind of came out of the spring game was a lot of discussion and kind of frustration over the reported attendance. Georgia Tech reported attendance around 9,000 people, which was roughly 10% of what Georgia reported the week before. And I think a lot of people were very frustrated by that, kind of disappointed, things like this. I would point out a few things. First of all, this is beyond meaningless to discuss this. I mean, it doesn't earn you any points, come the fall. It's a meaningless game. It's a glorified scrimmage. To expand on that, number two, not only is it a glorified scrimmage, but like Georgia Tech actively did nothing to try to actually bring in any more people. I mean, you look at Georgia's spring game, they brought in Ludacris. The athletic department was advertising it like nobody's business for weeks. They made a big deal out of this. They got a new coach coming in, all this, stuff. They're trying to drum up fan excitement. I think Paul Johnson at this point was just ready to get done with spring, try to get people healthy, and let's move on towards the fall. So there was no effort even put in towards let's try to do something. It was kind of an organic movement of let's fill the stands, but it never really caught on. And again, this stuff we can talk about forever. It's ultimately it's just really meaningless, and it's frustrating to see people get all up in a tizzy over whether it matters and how embarrassing it is and blah 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 blah. It's like it does not matter at all. Just leave it alone. Don't engage people over it. Just let it go. It's the dumbest discussion you can have. It's so obnoxious. Stop.
Joey, it's something we addressed the other day, but we kind of brushed upon it. So I'll kind of back up your point here in that if you know the way spring football is conducted, there are 2 or 3 scrimmages that have the same parameters for the coaches to evaluate players. Just nobody showed up at the stadium, but in regards to there being generally play down the field and drives conducted without kickoffs, without generally special teams, no punt returns typically. They may punt the football and want to go through that. They may set up for a field goal, then the coach may want to see it from 10 yards further, and there's all sorts of, they just want to see situations broken down. Obviously, nobody's playing in anger, not a whole lot of hitting out there. They may even call off the hitting sometimes in the second half, running clock. Again, just people watching and a television crew there to televise it versus a scrimmage a couple weeks earlier where the coaches were evaluating in the same setting. So what if I find strange about the whole attendance competition is that the biggest, most major schools, so you mentioned Georgia for good reason, there's the rivalry there and they're right in your backyard. Ohio State makes a big deal about it. I don't know why. Let's put 100,000 in the shoe when they'll get 70,000 without even caring about it. But they put on their big campaign. Alabama's done it in recent years. Other schools that aren't the type of schools that should care or need to. Who cares if you're number 1 in spring attendance or you attracted a paltry 75,000 and you were like 4th? What's it really matter? It's just odd to me. Jim, your thoughts about Pitt? I think this is a completely different topic for you talking about attendance because you were optimistic and feeling good about the attendance at the Pitt game, but that for completely different reasons that were tied to the activities surrounding the game and just a general vibe of there being enthusiasm based on what happened last year and the coming season.
Yeah, I kind of sympathize with Joey, because Pitt is Georgia Tech and Georgia is Penn State. So they had 65,000 at their spring game, and Pitt had 8,000, which 8,000 at Pitt was great. I mean, last year we only had 5, so to get 3,000 more, and like he said, there was no advertising or campaigning. I mean, there was a Penguin playoff game that day, there was a Pirate game that day, there was a concert right there. I mean, it's a city, things happen. Pitt football in April is not a big deal. So to get 8,000, everyone was pretty excited about it. Then of course the same day, Penn State 65,000. Who cares? I mean, you have 50,000 kids that go to the school already, so they can fill up the stands pretty easily. But to the game itself, like I told you, I went. It was kind of boring. Pitt's game, I think, went 19-13, something like that. So you didn't see the excitement you wanted to see in a spring game. So it was kind of dull. So I hope next year the coaches maybe do some more trick plays, just kind of open things up because you're at a spring practice and you're expecting thousands of people to show up, and whenever the game goes 19-13, it's like, what are we even doing here? Let's kind of go home. It's getting kind of boring, but it's fun to tailgate, meet up with your friends and all that, but it is a practice at the end of the day.
Well, you hit on it right there at the end. If you're going for the event just to hang out, get a little football flavor in spring and hang out, grill out, hang out with your friends, that's great. If you're stupid like me, and I've learned my lesson over the last few years, but I continue to do it, I'll DVR 10 spring games, and then I'll start them, and I watch 3 plays, and I'm like, it's not really football. I'll think I'm going to evaluate them, and I'll knock out some analysis on this, but it doesn't mean anything, and it's just a waste of time if it's not enjoyable football, and it doesn't mean enough for a non-coach especially to evaluate. So, read the articles, get your tidbits in your notes, and watch a couple highlight plays. But yeah, to spend 2.5 hours watching a spring game, unless you're at the game and can enjoy the weather and hanging out with some friends, then forget it. I don't really get it myself.
Yeah,
right.
It's just a practice. Whenever that was the first one I ever went to, and I realized right away, like, this is just a practice. Like, they don't care that we're in the stands.
Yeah, I've kind of done the same thing with NFL camps. I've gone to some NFL camps, and it's kind of cool the first time or the second time, but and maybe when they run some 7-on-7 drills, it's kind of cool. But to see guys coming out of their stances or hitting blocking sleds, you can only do that for so long to where the novelty kind of wears off very quickly. All right, guys, good stuff. I think the next time we have you on, maybe we'll look ahead to 2016 and have you peg one guy on your team that you would like to see break out, that you think is ready to hit that next level, that maybe just saw the field marginally last year but has the potential and maybe possibly could be given the right opportunity to make an impact this fall. So good stuff from Joey Weaver from the Rumble Seat and also Jim Hammett from Cardiac Hill. This is another ACC Breakdown. It's always fun talking some football, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.